Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about how I've adapted my teaching of the sciences within a secondary setting in order to better meet the needs of my pupils with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I think it's important before we decide to focus on any specific SEND needs or resulting adaptations. I think it's really important that we contextualize what broad category of SEND we're exploring. And if we have the four categories here from the SEND Code of Practice, it's definitely going to be, given our focus on ADHD, the social, emotional, and mental health difficulties that our pupils face. And I think it's also really important that we acknowledge just how important adaptation is as a whole, particularly in the context for pupils with SEND. I think it's best highlighted by this recurrent presence of adaptations within the ITT core content framework as well. So making sure that we're being as knowledgeable as we can on that SEND code of practice, but then also ensuring that we're being communicative with our peers and our educators, such as our special educational needs coordinators, to again make sure that we're best placed to deliver these adaptations. It's also really important to consciously acknowledge what model of disability we're using as well to influence this approach to SEND. Also, we can see sort of two predominant examples of this here in either the medical model, which really focuses heavily on diagnosis and how best we can rectify disability and its symptoms, or the social model, which places more of that accountability for change on society and in the environment. I think in the context of ADHD, I think a more combined approach is definitely the best way forward. We have this ICFCY model here from the World Health Organization. I mean, that's because although as educators, we do need to be aware of that pharmacological intervention of ADHD, but at the same time, I think we have the most impact when we focus on those environmental factors. Over to the condition itself, ADHD is a condition which has two primary components or manifestations, with either being attentive based or activity based, or of course a combination of the two. So in the classroom, this results in either a real difficulty maintaining attention within a specific task or a certain level of hyperactivity as well, with both of them seeming to elicit some sort of difficulty in being able to communicate or verbalize their understanding within the lesson. I think Mansfield and Sonny have put this most inclusively by simply stating that the ADHD neurotype is simply a state of being. It isn't inherently anything maladaptive. And the symptoms themselves, so ADHD can be defined as the extreme end of a spectrum of either these attentive or active traits, which every person possesses in some quantity. Now, we believe that it's the executive functions that seems to have to play a part in these sort of difficulties. So if we see this Mitchell and Sutherland's teacher and learning model here, within the usual teaching and learning process, we have some sort of input, followed by the biological structures, the form of memory, resulting in retrieval and some sort of output within a task. We have these executive functions that are essential in providing the strategies that allow for this learning process to take place. And again, it's these executive functions, so things like inhibition, self-control, self-regulation, that our pupils with ADHD really struggle with. And it's inhibition in particular, which is really important within the sciences, because we believe that inhibition and the rest of these executive functions are essential in understanding or developing a conceptual understanding of sciences in particular. Now, in light of this, the rest of my talk focuses on how I've attempted to adapt my teaching for this very small sample size of 3 pupils that we see on the screen here, which are all chemistry pupils of mine within my current placement school. Now, all of this teaching has taken place within a single sex grammar school environment, which is the reason for all of these pupils being male presenting. But we can also see here what's really interesting is this heavy featuring of pupils with either multiple co-conditions. So we can see here pupil A has a co-condition of autism, OCD, and anxiety. Pupil B again with autism, and pupil C there with that co-condition of sensory processing modulation difficulties. We can also see a heavy presence of being medicated for their ADHD as well, both in pupil B and C. Now, conversations with my SENCOs revealed that both co-conditions and being medicated for ADHD is highly prevalent in pupils within my current placement school. Just before introducing any main categories of intervention strategies that we have at our fingertips for our pupils with ADHD, I just wanted to address these two main themes that were continually occurring within the literature regarding these intervention strategies. First one here, we can see from this quote from Moore and colleagues that there's most strongest evidence attached to those interventions that are done tangentially for these combined interventions through their meta-analysis of studies focusing on these adaptations for pupils with ADHD. We found that combined strategies were always the most effective. So I've attempted to ensure that I'm following strategies concurrently or tangentially throughout this process. And I think the second one is just how important an inclusive environment is. We can see these worrying trends with the work of De Boer and Pidgeot here, and Adamis and colleagues as well, that not only are pupils more likely to be rejected by their peers socially, there's also this worrying trend of negative opinions being harboured by educators themselves. And so something that I've tried to continually challenge within this process has been to ensure that we have an inclusive environment maintained within the classroom. Things such as simple as implementing strategies to entire classes, not just to pupils in question. And I think this is really important as well, considering the cohort of students that we have, given those co-conditions of anxiety and autism, which makes it even harder for these pupils to feel integrated into the classroom environment. Regarding the strategies themselves, I think Gastra and colleagues best sort of highlight the three main categories or approaches that we can take as intervention strategies. We have these antecedent-based, consequent-based, or self-regulatory based intervention strategies for ADHD. Now, given the scope or the small scope of this study, I've chosen to focus on the antecedent-based intervention strategies simply because these have the most evidence at being most beneficial for helping to foster those executive functions that are so important in the sciences. First main category that I wanted to focus on in terms of these adaptations was task modifications. So in other words, essentially, how can we adapt tasks in such a way to help minimize that barrier to learning that our pupils of ADHD face? There's a variety of ways that we can do this. So for example, fluctuating the duration of tasks, minimizing the barrier of attention by ensuring that tasks can be sensibly brief and partnered with some sort of immediate feedback, which was particularly important in periods of transition within the lesson. So for example, starter tasks. Difficulty as well. We can fluctuate difficulty, allowing pupils to overcome that frustration that they have with too difficult a task, allowing them to start with something they find less intimidating, moving on to more difficult challenges as they go through the lesson. Structure and choice as well. Raggy and Cronis are massive advocates of structuring a task to provide a certain level of predictability, reducing that need for pupils to provide any sort of level of self-produced stimulation. Did we see these results? I would definitely say so. When we talk about duration, I definitely saw an increased completion rate of tasks, particularly in our younger cohort. So, for example, with our pupil A in year 8, difficulty was a little bit more mixed. I think whilst it was very beneficial for our older cohorts, so pupils B and C, our younger cohorts found it more difficult to see a level of nuance there in terms of what was more difficult or less difficult within a certain topic, and generally branded topics as a whole as easy or difficult. So it's a little bit more tricky there to implement with our younger cohorts. Structure and choice, however, was definitely a noticeable benefit when it came to completion rates. Something I didn't see was Raggy and Cronus' suggestion that there can be an increase in any academic performance there with this technique, but I'd like to hope that if we implemented it over a longer stretch of time, instead of 2 to 3 weeks, hopefully we'd definitely see some sort of academic benefit. I think a last note on task modification as well is that it has such an opportunity for it to be used as a combined strategy, as suggested by Moore et al. We can structure tasks in a way that manipulates duration, difficulty, structure, and choice in order to provide that level of combined intervention that is purported to be so beneficial. And then lastly as well, I think it's just such a inclusive strategy. It's something that we can provide to the class as a whole, not just to our students with ADHD, and ensuring that our adaptations and strategies are tailored in such a way that they can be provided to the class as a whole as well. So moving on to the second of the two adaptations, which I decided to focus on, is this clear, explicit instruction. And it's because we have this concern for pupils with ADHD that barrier of inattention that they have might make longer, verbose, or more difficult instruction, which we do unfortunately see in the sciences quite often, far harder to follow than for a neurotypical pupil. And so any methods that we can use to implement to either increase the clarity or the explicitness of this instruction only gives these pupils a better opportunity to succeed. And the best example I saw and implemented within this process was the use of gesturing, which is simply put the use of gesturing within your instructions. We have a couple of categories of these gestures here, which is given to us by Wang and colleagues. In the context of science teaching, given how common it is to struggle with communicating more abstract concepts, the use of these metaphoric gestures that Wang provides here is really helpful to visualize more abstract ideas. And what was amazing is that I found that the more I began to use these, not only did I see the measured benefits in response rate and attention span in my pupils with ADHD, Within my older pupils, so pupil B and C, I actually began to see them using these gestures as well. And this is really amazing because we have this purported issue with our pupils with ADHD in that they really struggle with their ability to convey their understanding. And so this option of gesturing might not only be helpful for clear, explicit instruction, but it might be massively helpful for these pupils to be able to construct their own understanding and to convey their own understanding to the educator. So just a little bit of reflection then. I think although we saw some amazing benefits to the implementation of these two techniques, I think we do have to limit ourselves to how much we extrapolate this data due to how small the sample size was, and also for how short a time we implemented these strategies as well. I think in order to bolster the reliability of our results, I think replicating it in say a different environment, say a mixed environment, would definitely be more beneficial, and implementing it in a comprehensive environment as well, given the fact that this was done within a grammar environment. Thank you very much for your time.